They better get these lines right. Hey y'all, it's Zephyr Scalzetti. Welcome to They Better Get These Lines Right, where we're delivering the 411 on all things redistricting. Redistricting is our once-in-a-decade process of accounting for state-level population changes across the country to draw new district maps from the federal level to the local level, which makes an impact on how funding is distributed for healthcare, schools, and roads. Basically, everything that's important to you. The show is made possible by Alabama Values, a grassroots communication organization that uses the media and visual stories to raise awareness around what's happening on Alabama's political scene. On today's episode, we're going to catch you up on how we got here in the first place, and we're going to start in the beginning, the census. Stick around, because I used to be a census worker, and I'm going to give you the inside scoop on what you and your community need to know about the census. So, what even is the census? The census is a critical process that occurs every 10 years to determine the population of the entire United States. That's why you'll sometimes see it referred to by its full government name, the decennial census, aka the 10-year census. Census numbers are used to allocate resources, reapportion political representation, and determine electoral boundaries. When we talk about resources, let's talk about the big green elephant in the room, $1.5 trillion with a T. The federal government relies on census data to distribute $1.5 trillion across 316 programs like Medicaid, federal student loans, highway construction grants, low-income tax credits, so on and so forth. But have you ever wondered how we get census numbers? Primarily, we get census data through self-response, aka you or someone in your household answers the questionnaire sent by the census to every household in the country, which can be completed online, by mail, or by phone. You get asked to provide information about the number of people living in the household, their age, gender, race, and ethnicity. And then this information is used to determine the population of the entire United States. For households that didn't respond to the initial census questionnaire, or the ads, or the mail, or the follow-up mail, or the phone calls, for those folks, the Census Bureau conducted what they call non-response follow-up, aka we gotta count these folks somehow. Census enumerators, which was my official government title, are sent out to these households to collect the necessary information in person. This method is crucial in ensuring an accurate count of the population, as not everyone will respond to the initial questionnaire. There's a reason behind that, and we'll get to that later in this episode. The Census Bureau also uses administrative records to obtain census numbers. These records include data from sources like the Social Security Administration, the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. This method is particularly useful in counting populations that may not be captured through self-response or non-response follow-up, such as individuals in nursing homes or drug rehabilitation centers. So just because you didn't answer the census doesn't mean someone didn't answer it for you. Alabama had the lowest self-reported rate in the country. That meant that more census workers had to work to track down folks to verify who lived at residences. I worked as a census enumerator in Jefferson County, and we tried really hard to track down as many folks as possible. If we couldn't get direct answers, we would ask neighbors, property managers, others that potentially knew information about residents. Here's the inside scoop. Doing the census yourself lets you control your own information. Census workers have to close an address one way or another. If you can give a census worker names, that's really helpful to ensure that they're not double counting people. But if you can't give the census worker names, you're worried about undocumented family members, so on and so forth, put down male 1 in their 40s, female 1 in their 30s, female 3 in their 60s, or even just adult 1 or adult 2, etc. Please try to include race. When you see statistics like this district is 41% black or African American, this area is majority black, only folks who put race down on the census are counted in that. Some neighborhoods look like black folks are moving out, but in reality, those folks understandably refuse to answer that question. Self-reporting ensures a more accurate count, and it puts you in the driver's seat. Real talk, the government knows all of this info about us already. We carry supercomputers in our pockets every day that track our location and more. This is your opportunity to drive the car, so take advantage of that. Let's get into some of the issues. Census notices are tied to the address, not the person. This comes into play when folks had filled out the census form but had moved. Oftentimes, they couldn't understand why they kept getting contacted at their new address despite filling out the census form already. Another issue that occurred related to counting college students. Alabamians were counted as to where they were on April 1st, 2020. But if you rewind to March 2020, and all of Alabama's universities and colleges had decided by April 1st to move to an online class structure in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. You may remember this. This caused college students to be undercounted because nearly everyone went home, broke their leases, or left for their parents' or other relatives' homes in rural areas. This was particularly felt in Tuscaloosa and the University of Alabama, which had a student population of 38,000 in spring 2020, but due to the COVID-19 situation, the city ended up being 400 people short of 100,000 residents. That's important because there are grants and other money that can come the way of cities that are greater than 100,000 people. There was also fear in Alabama that we would lose a congressional seat due to population decline. The way it works is that congressional House seats are capped at 435 people. Reapportionment is the redistribution of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives based on changes in the population of the entire United States. Luckily, New York lost one of their congressional House seats by falling 89 people short in the census count. If they had counted an additional 89 people, Alabama would have lost one of our congressional House districts. These counts have huge ramifications for representation in the halls of Congress. Let's get into undercounts. According to the Census Bureau, Latinos with a net undercount rate of 4.99% were left out of the 2020 census at more than 3 times the rate of a decade earlier. People who identified as white and not Latino were overcounted at a net rate of 1.64%, almost double the rate in 2010. According to Kaiser Health News, the 2020 census missed nearly 1 out of every 17 Native Americans who live on reservations, an undercount that could very well lead to insufficient federal funding for essential health, nutrition, and social programs in remote communities with high poverty rates and scarce access to services. The census numbers help determine how much money is allocated to various programs on reservations, such as healthcare, social services, education, and infrastructure. So why did these undercounts happen? Remember how I told you not everyone takes the census? Historically, marginalized communities and rural areas are the hardest to count for multiple systemic reasons. Folks are hard to find, do not trust the government, understandably, and there had been so much confused messaging around who should answer the census. Per the Constitution, the census is supposed to count the whole number of persons per state, regardless of race, nationality, or citizenship. But many undocumented folks and non-citizens were scared away from the census over concerns about a citizenship question that was ultimately blocked. 2020 offered multiple additional challenges. Because of the pandemic, the Census Bureau got an extension to conduct the decennial census until October 31st. But in early August, the Trump administration sought to end the count by September 30th. Remember, only 62% of Alabamians self-reported their census. That meant that census workers had 6 weeks to count 40% of the state. In comparison, back in 2010, 72% of households initially responded to the census. From personal experience, the first areas in Jefferson County to close out every single address on the census were predominantly white, wealthy suburbs. That 40% of the state was not evenly distributed. It was concentrated in Black communities, poor rural communities, Latinx communities, and other marginalized communities. So back to the timeline. On August 6th, the Trump admin announces their intention to end the census count by September 30th. Census workers start knocking on doors on August 14th, 2020. On September 5th, a federal judge issues a restraining order to force the count to continue with its original end date on October 31st. On September 28th, the census turns around and tells us, via tweet, that actually, we're ending in 1 week on October 5th. The same federal judge, who is quite annoyed at this point, shot that plan down, saying it violated her previous order, and the matter ends up in front of the Supreme Court. Ultimately, the Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration to end the count early on October 15th. But by September 8th, with the census's future tied up in federal court, Alabama fell to last place in our census response. With only 22 days on the clock, Alabama had only counted 80% of her residents, and cases were getting tougher and tougher to close. We're talking rural homes without neighbors for miles, places that may have been occupied on April 1st but had been destroyed or abandoned after, for example, tornadoes, including a tornado outbreak on Easter weekend, April 12, 2020. To avoid undercounts in the future, it is critical to have buy-in and trust from the communities who are most impacted. That means hiring folks who already live in that community and are already known and trusted. It also means having cultural awareness and competency. The Census Bureau held public listening sessions throughout 2022. As a result of public comment, they are considering adding additional categories for Black or African American people to allow for identification of descendants of enslaved Americans. In these public listening sessions, the most common proposed category were American freedmen or American descendant of slavery. Proponents claim that this is potentially a precursor to determining how many people would be owed reparations. Those against these changes say that slavery is not an ethnicity and that these changes would be confusing for a populace that's already hard to count and lead to a more significant undercount and loss of resources. Other proposed changes include more specific categories for Asian, like Japanese, Hmong, or Cambodian, as well as creating a new category for Middle Eastern North African, or MENA. Tune in next time to They Better Get These Lines Right to stay connected and informed. The way maps are drawn has impacts on so many issues that we care about, like voting rights, healthcare, criminal justice, reproductive justice, and education equality. Until next time, they better get these lines right.